Are we in the brave new world of Donroe Doctrine, and what does it mean for the world? The U.S. President Donald Trump had this to say at the press conference right after U.S. military captured Venezuelan President Maduro.
All of these actions were in gross violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, dating back more than 2 centuries, and not anymore. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines. And the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Donroe Doctrine. I don't know. It's Monroe Doctrine. We sort of forgot about it. It was very important, but we forgot about it. We don't forget about it anymore. Under our new national security strategy, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again.
So what is the Donroe Doctrine exactly? How did it depart from the traditional Monroe Doctrine? And how did it help explain Trump's controversial moves on Venezuela and potentially Greenland, as well as his withdrawal from a number of international institutions? And amid all these shifts in international order, what choice does Taiwan face, and what does all this mean for Asia and the world? Hello, and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I am Wenty Song, your host for today. To discuss these issues and more, I'm joined by 2 very distinguished guests today. And first I have Dr. William Stanton, former director of the American Institute in Taiwan. And I also have joining us for the very first time, Professor Ding Hongbin, who is a professor of management at the Loyola University in Maryland. Thank you both so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So in his 1823 State of the Union address, former U.S. President James Monroe declared that the Americas are for the Americans. It's a statement that came to define more than a century of U.S. isolationism. After President Monroe laid down the foundation of the so-called Monroe Doctrine, what happened is that it's followed by President Teddy Roosevelt, who went further than he did in 1904, when Roosevelt asserted the U.S. right to intervene in the Latin Americas, and that includes dispatching naval forces into the Dominican Republic. That has proved to be a watershed moment for sustained U.S. military interventions in the region. Now, later during President Obama's second term in the 2010s, you had Secretary of State at the time, John Kerry, who told the OAS, that is the Organization for American States, in 2013, that the era of the Monroe Doctrine is over. That position has largely held, arguably until early January, when Trump invoked what has been termed the Donroe Doctrine, widely seen as a revival of the Monroe Doctrine, or perhaps a Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. Now, I want to come to probably Bill first here, just for a quick overview on this new concept we're playing here. Monroe Doctrine, Donroe Doctrine, what do they mean? How do they differ? And maybe about timing too. Why is it happening now?
Some scholars say that actually the Donroe Doctrine is, instead of saying as the Monroe Doctrine did, that we want to keep European countries out of interfering in the U.S., we were now saying that China and Russia should not be allowed to intervene in the hemisphere. But considering Trump's actions more broadly, I would say that the Donroe Doctrine is basically whatever Trump wants to do, he can do, because he wants now to take Greenland and perhaps also Iceland. And there's also talk about bombing Iran. So the very kinds of broader wars that apparently people thought Trump would get away from. So
this sounds almost like an international extension of this term that's been making it around in the U.S., which is the idea of unitary executive theory, where there's few restraint on U.S. president's power domestically, and now perhaps we're talking about international offshoot of that. I think I will come to Professor Ding here. When people discuss Donroe Doctrine, one thing that seems to come up is the idea of the place of ideology in U.S. politics. Obviously, we used to talk about America not only being the indispensable power in the world, as Madeleine Albright used to say, but we also talk about U.S. under President Ronald Reagan as the so-called city upon a hill, being a beacon of democracy, quite a number of important theories. So I'm wondering, what's your take on Donroe Doctrine in terms of the place for ideas and ideology undergirding U.S. foreign policy under this administration?
So the de-idealization, if we put this term in the context of international politics, pretty much we are saying or seeing something like, well, the big ideas, we don't care so much about it. We will care more about realistic international politics. And in the international relations, international politics tradition, there is certainly a very strong realism. Some people will argue that, well, realism is also an ideology. What are we talking about? But wait, there's a difference. So the ideologicalization or ideology of in the domain of international politics usually involves the fact that let's have a vision. The vision is about driving, shaping international system or international relationships with something. That something could be democracy. That something could be nation building. That something could be human rights. A lot of something, or a very a stronger support of international order. But what we are seeing today, if we quickly say that, well, de-ideologization is happening, I think it is, because Donroe Doctrine does not necessarily mean I'm going to support one big idea or another. In fact, the video clip we just played, the last sentence, President Trump said, the Donroe Doctrine is military dominance in the Western Hemisphere. I think that summarizes it very well. There is no big idea, if any big idea at all, it's really more about American dominance in the Western Hemisphere.
All right, it sounds like a rebalancing between perhaps realism and liberal internationalism in a sense. And how about how the real big idea is being perhaps reshuffled, let's say. Bill, I think I want to ask you about this next question, and that is, we always wonder why it surfaced, and once it surfaced, the question then is it surfacing here because of Donald Trump, the U.S. president personality, or is it something emblematic of a bigger structural shift in the international system, be it different distribution of power, different balance of power? I guess I'm trying to ask, is this a personality-driven change or a structural-driven change?
Well, I think it's very much driven by the personality of Donald Trump. He likes to think of himself as a very tough guy, as a strong leader, someone who doesn't accept any nonsense. And in a certain way, I think he, particularly after his success taking over Venezuela, I think he thinks he's been proven right, that if you're tough and you're strong, you can do whatever you want. And that's the attitude he's taken on domestic issues, on many issues in the United States. And now it carries over also internationally. But I don't think it's necessarily going to be very successful over the longer run. I think you win more friends and allies through cooperation than you do through threats.
I want to move to the next topic, and by extension, we want to see how it's being manifested, this idea of Donroe Doctrine. Now, invoking the same principle of Donroe Doctrine, we see that President Trump has argued that the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro, as well as bid to take control over Greenland, were aimed at countering the influence of China and Russia specifically. Let's take a look.
We don't want to have Russia there. We don't want to have China there. And by the way, we don't want Russia or China going to Greenland, which if we don't take Greenland, you're going to have Russia or China as your next door neighbor. That's not going to happen.
So, sphere of influence, did it signal a revival of the belief that U.S. enjoys a privileged freedom of action, its own self-defined backyard in the Western Hemisphere? And maybe I'll ask Bill this question on this Western Hemisphere. Just judging from the sentiment we've seen from Trump administration so far, this desire to declare intent to exclude China and Russia from Venezuela and Greenland, in Western Hemisphere in general, what kind of thinking do you think is underlying it?
Well, he really believes that the U.S. should be the dominant power in the world. In many ways, it already is, but he thinks that we need to exercise that power and influence more the shape of other countries. I mean, it extends now, he's talking about taking on the Ayatollah of Iran, for example. But in the process, he's also, we can talk about this more later, but he's also not really paying attention to good friends like Taiwan. And that's very troubling to me. He's basically said, well, you know, it's up to what Xi Jinping wants to do. So on the one hand, he's in our hemisphere and elsewhere, he's being very tough. But when it comes to actually being tough toward Putin over Ukraine or tough toward Xi Jinping, he doesn't want any part of that. He keeps on saying he has great relationships with these leaders.
Let me go to Professor Dean to extend from that conversation here, this idea of sphere of influence that we seem to be feeling from President Trump's new doctrine. Do you think this revival of this belief that U.S. enjoys a privileged freedom of action in the Western Hemisphere, in what U.S. might see as its own backyard, how do you see that sit with conventional international law, and how is it reconciling, I suppose, U.S. international narrative and its interest-based realities, or national interest-based realities?
Well, I think the immediate reaction from the international community is going to be universally the United States of America and its president violates the international law. And this reaction has been seen, observed, and reported basically everywhere. But if we take a similar example, some 3 decades ago, Noriega, when President Bush, the old President Bush, invaded Panama and captured Noriega, sent to the United States for trial. The reaction back then was everybody in the United States, well, everybody meaning the members of the United Nations, the Organization of American States, they all publicly condemned the action, the unilateral action of the United States of America. And including some of the traditional allies, France, UK, it seems like it's a move nobody liked and endorsed. And yet later, I think it was 1997 or 1999, Noriega was extradited to France for trial. So that's almost 10 years later, right? So the immediate reaction, that's what we are seeing right now with Maduro. And we are going to see a lot of negative reactions because on surface it is a violation of international law. But in the long run, does it help stabilize or improve the functioning of international system? I think that's time will tell. But at least at this very moment, within a month of January 3rd, I think it's very clear that the U.S. has violated international laws.
Right, and it sort of brings back memory of the Kosovo War. I remember back then NATO launched airstrikes into Kosovo or I guess Serbia nearby, and there were conversations about how while it may lack sufficiently robust basis in international law, at least it was seen as illegal but legitimate. There are some more, I guess, ideas-driven ways to justify it, and perhaps this new, largely interest-based narrative may not be giving that much airtime to the ideas portion as well. So maybe that's something we will observe in weeks and months to come to see whether it's hard to make up for it. I want to come back to you, Bill, because this segues pretty nicely. Professor Dean talks about the reaction from other countries and allies. And so I want to ask you if you can dig a little bit deeper here. How do you think this Donroe Doctrine might impact on international order in the long term? How are allies reacting to it? Are they adapting any strategy to respond to this?
Well, I don't think other countries are going to follow the same path as Trump. Many of them don't, do abide by international law. They don't see the benefits for it. For example, China clearly is very strong, but instead of trying to take over a country in Latin America, it's been pointed out that what China's been doing is basically in cooperation with the Latin American countries taking over the economies there. For example, China now is in control of the electrical grid that it built in Peru and has profited from it. And while we're, attacking Venezuela, there's also lithium fields in Peru and Brazil, other countries, and 60% of those lithium fields are now controlled by Chinese entities. So it's proving counterproductive in terms of, why would other people want to try the Trump way, or rather they'd be more inclined to say, hey, let's just try to do business with these countries.
All right, so it sounds like for those other countries who feel like they may not have as much of a direct stake in the fight in this integrated power rivalry, sometimes China may be trying to use a lot of carrots for countries like Peru. Whether the U.S. is getting the right mix of carrots and sticks remains to be seen, I suppose. Yeah. I want to come to Professor Ding next here. We talk about how Donroe Doctrine came into being. The next question that we sort of discuss is what's the impact? The next question then is naturally, is it here to stay? And if so, why? If not, why not?
Well, the president's term is 4 years. So President Trump, 1 year down, 3 more to go. Unless he suffers from a major defeat in this year's midterm election, I think he is going to continue his Donroe Doctrine without question. And he obviously will take the victory, if there is a victory in this year's midterm election, as a mandate for him to continue what he's doing. So what I'm saying is this year's midterm election result, both House and the Senate, will play local politics, domestic politics, but it will play a major role in the foreign policy of the United States of America. Now, after Donald Trump, will Donroe Doctrine continue? I think it takes two to tango, basically. So one is, what's the international system? What's the situation of the United States in world politics? Has 3 years of Donroe Doctrine won U.S. more friends or create more foes? Has it strengthened the United States or weakens the United States? I think 3 years, not terribly long for international politics point of view, yet it's long enough to see the initial results from the practice. So 3 years later, I think it will be a time for some sort of adjustments, if not major adjustments. But in the next 3 years, if there's a win by the end of this year by the Republicans, then we are going to see the continuation of Donroe Doctrine.
Right, democratic will decide the long-term policy viability, as it should in democracies. Mm-hmm. So let's move on to the next topic here. How is Asia responding to this? How exactly, especially Taiwan, how is Taiwan responding to this? Addressing to Donroe Doctrine, Taiwan's Foreign Minister Lin Jialong, he stressed in a TV interview lately that under the framework of America First, as well as intensify U.S.-China rivalry, Taiwan must make itself indispensable. Let's take a look.
除了地缘政治上，因为川普所谓的新门罗主义更强调西半球的对他国家安全的重要性，所以我们怎么样去利用川普的所谓的美国优先的政策，让台湾也变成不可或缺，这就是我经济外交龙邦计划最重要的战略观。
So, Professor Ding, I'm going to ask you next question. We've gone over this sort of grand strategy, big international relations stuff. An element about this whole equation, of course, is the more sub-state level diplomacy. And I'm wondering, can you share some lessons here or experience about how city level, perhaps state level, or sub-state level diplomacy between U.S. and Taiwan, some maybe successful stories or lessons learned here that could be useful for Taiwan going forward?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, generally speaking, I would say for sub-state level actors between United States and, well, I should say U.S. and Taiwan relationship, businesses or major businesses such as TSMC is one of the big ones, and its success in Phoenix, Arizona is for everybody to see. We don't have to try very hard nowadays, luckily in the United States, we don't have to try very hard to explain how successful, how good Taiwan can help the United States. And the other side, which is less known, is the sister city, the people-to-people, community-to-community, the citizens diplomacy activities. And I will just make one example. For example, a few years ago, 2019, before COVID, the city of Elon and the city of Rockville, which is right outside of Washington, D.C., signed sister city agreements. There were some pushbacks. Interestingly, the pushbacks were from the Chinese communities in Rockville area. This is not even a Chinese city. It's an American city in the United States, close to the capital city, Washington, D.C. Yet, Chinese community pushed back. I really have to thank our friends in Rockville, Maryland area, including the mayor, city council, Rockville Sister Cities Corporation, a nonprofit organizations that support and manage sister city activities. They stay on the course. They truly believed in the values of community-to-community exchanges and citizens diplomacy, and decided to go with it. So since 2019, there has been almost annual exchanges on both sides. Mayors come to visit, delegations come to visit, and Elon sent kids over to either visit or to perform. So it become a very vibrant relationships and spin off from there. So that's just one example, and there are way more examples like this out there, and of course, a lot more to be done.
Thank you. So it sounds great. These are businesses, NGO, even individuals who can play an important role in building that reservoir long-term goodwill between society to society level. That's great to hear. Bill, I'm going to ask you, just to jump off that related theme, how can Taiwan improve its relations here? We know that we talk about values and interests being two important pillars of bilateral relations between U.S. and Taiwan. And I'm wondering, just following on what Lin Jialong said earlier, can you highlight a point or two about the more interest part of Taiwan's argument that Taiwan should try to focus on?
Well, it's tough when you have a President Trump who's basically saying, Xi Jinping will decide what happens to Taiwan. It's a very unfortunate kind of statement, and his desire to curry favor, I guess, with Xi Jinping, particularly prior to, I think he's planning a visit in April. And I think he thinks he's going to get largesse as a result of that visit. But I think Taiwan sells itself. If people would come here and know it, I mean, I've had a couple of tours in the PRC, but once I came to Taiwan, I've lived here now for 16 years. So I think one thing that would be helpful is maybe to try to get more universities, more businesses interested in tourism in Taiwan, to come and pay a visit to Taiwan and see what a secure, safe, friendly, happy society it is. And I think Taiwan should probably put more effort into selling itself overseas. It's leading in many polls of when they say countries, what's the best country to go to for what? And Taiwan is often in the top tiers. And so I think Taiwan should advertise itself more in the United States and say, a good alternative to elsewhere in Asia, don't have to say where, would be come to Taiwan. And I think it would be a good idea to bring, particularly so many Taiwanese speak English. Bring more tourists here. Build more goodwill at a person-to-person local level, as you've already suggested. So I think Taiwan should make more effort on tourism and people-to-people exchanges overall.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. Very few things can be face-to-face contact and actual first-hand experience directly. Any final words of advice from you, Professor Ding?
Not so much advice, but I completely agree with what Bill just said. Taiwanese people, we need to work harder and work smarter to promote ourselves. Yes, there are a lot of competitions out there, but Taiwan is very unique. And the hard works that we have done in the past maybe 10 years or so is starting to pay off. One example, I work for a university that never have students coming to Taiwan for graduate study. But last year, we had 2. And they found me, because I still am, the only professor in my university. And I asked them, so why do you, of all the places, why do you go to Taiwan for graduate study? Oh, I see, my friends say this is a great place. I just want to go. I see this from the internet. So our message are getting out there. Can we do more? Can we do better? Yes, absolutely. But we need to be consistent and continue to work smarter.
Taiwan needs to have more self-confidence about how good it is, I think. I think I've always said, I wrote an essay years ago, which was called Learning to Appreciate a Modern Miracle, Taiwan. And one of the points I made initially was, I find Taiwanese are very self-effacing. They say, oh, shucks, you know, we're no big deal. No, Taiwan is a big deal. Technologically, in terms of commerce, in terms of culture. It's a great place. So Taiwan needs to be more forward and more self-confident in promoting itself.
Thank you so much for that. And on that note, I'm afraid that's all the time we have today, but I'd like to thank you both so much for sharing your insight, your experience, and your time with us and with our great audience. So thank you.
Thank you.
If you like our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching our show today. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.